Hi there, my name is Gavin Wilhite, and I'm here to present to you from games to tissues, basically my journey from the games industry, the virtual reality industry, to bioprinting, to tissue engineering. A few lessons that I would like to bring over, things that I see that seem similar between the industries, some things that might be of particular help from the games industry, and we'll talk a little bit about some creativity techniques as well. All right, so quickly about me. So I come from the games industry. I was born and raised in Hawaii, went over to school at USC in Los Angeles where I studied video game development. Went off, worked at Disney for a few years in education, founded a company called AltSpace VR. It's a social virtual reality platform that was acquired by Microsoft a few years back. And now actually, between the time that we organized this talk and I'm giving it now, joined on with Prolis Biologics as their vice president of software engineering. So a little bit about this talk. So we're basically going to go over three things. So the first is sort of shared principles that I see between the games industry and bioprinting. The second one is to show you how I put some of those principles into practice with a piece of software called Tissue Workshop that's up there live right now that people are welcome to use to help them build scaffolds. And the third is I'm going to give just a few kind of fun creativity tips for doing some good brainstorms and for getting ideas out there if you need to in the course of your work. So let's go ahead and start with some of these shared principles. So maybe this is obvious, maybe more so to some of the folks who have 3D background out there, but 3D is 3D. There's a lot of lessons, of tools, of libraries, of formats that are really useful. A lot of these started in the games industry. Some of them might seem more like they're gaming tools, but you start looking at things like Maya and Houdini and ZBrush and all these sort of content creation tools, and those are all very applicable, I think, to 3D printing tissue. Found that to be true myself. Working with Prellis. The math is the same, and it's the same kind of hiring pool, right? So if you're looking to hire people in this area, I would look at the games industry. I would look at the animation industry. It'd be wonderful to have some more folks from there at this conference. Next thing here is that tools are important. Might be obvious, but we use tools for basically all the work that we do. In the games industry, tools is a huge focus. It's usually the first thing I look at when I am building a new piece of software is what tools, or sorry, a new game, is what tools can I build to enable this experience. The best games that I built for Disney were all based around a new level design tool. The SDK that I built at AltSpace, the thing that enabled all of those different spaces for people to be in, the different applications, the different experiences, the birthday parties, that was basically a tool, and so it's incredibly powerful. And so really, if you get a chance, hone and focus on these tools that you use on a daily basis. I threw up a few on here. Commander, if you have to use the terminal on Windows, highly recommend you download Commander. Very great drop-in replacement. My favorite thing to do with it is I have it bound to the tilde key on my keyboard. So when I press that, it just drops down like a Quake-style console from the top of the screen. Lets me do whatever I need to do very quickly. It's got mouse support, cursor support, all that kind of stuff. PyCharm, if you're doing Python development, unless you got like a really extensive Visual Studio toolchain set up, please do it. In games, we've just found these IDEs to be absolutely invaluable, especially when you start doing refactors. Could give a whole nother talk about things that I am trying to implement as far as Python best practices, but I have to expect that it's used extensively in our industry here. So highly recommend that. And then I just wanted to mention here that the game tools are incredibly powerful. This is a $120 billion industry. Every time one of these top games comes out, it's selling more than any other media product in history. It's selling more than every Harry Potter book. It's selling more than Titanic. So this is a massive industry, has put massive investment inside the tools that are used to make games. So things like Unity are incredibly powerful. And if you are looking to process, to visualize 3D data, highly recommend looking at these tools. All right. Number three is that scale really matters. You have to plan for this ahead of time. In the games industry, it's all about how many people can play your games, how many people can be online at the same time. That is directly correlated to your sales. And I know here we're trying to grow this industry, we're trying to heal people, and that all requires scale. So if you're writing software, make sure you automate your tool chains. Make sure you test your code. We're not actually great at this in the games industry. People are slowly catching up. I've had to learn myself. But the more that you can focus on having good test coverage, the better. Um, Fostering good DevOps. This is something that I really learned at Altspace was it's very, very hard to hire someone to run DevOps for you, to host the servers, to configure everything. These people are difficult to find, primarily because nobody does it unless they kind of are in a position where they have to learn it, and that's usually helping a big company scale. And so those folks are expensive. So the more that you can foster, and some of this stuff isn't too hard, it just requires somebody to do it. So the more that you can foster that DevOps inside your company or with contractors you work really closely with, highly recommend doing that. And then of course, especially we've had lots of threat flags thrown up around COVID data, but just beware these persistent security threats. In the games, it's usually the players. Sometimes disorganized crimes trying to steal, CD keys and stuff like that. But just implement your best practices. Do what you can. Get audits if you can. This stuff is important. All right. Let's talk a little bit about Tissue Workshop. So this is a tool that I built in conjunction with Prellis Biologics, and basically what it is it's a online service that you can log onto that allows you to customize a bunch of parameters on the right here and have it update a scaffold that you want to print and introduce cells on the left. So you can see that I'm going to go ahead and adjust things like the sort of crossing angle between those tubes. I can adjust the diameter of them, the wall thickness. We can configure it for different printers. So if you want it to print on a Prellis printer, which has that kind of 1 micron resolution, you can configure that. If you want it to print on another bioprinter with a lower resolution, you can configure that also. Get those STL files out when you're done here and just go ahead, drop it into your slicer and print it. So we were really happy with how this turned out. Took a lot of inspiration from games. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later here. This is available to try right now on the web. Go to prellisbio.com/tissue workshop and let me know what you think. We'll hook you up with a good trial. You can download and test some of these prints. So it runs directly in a web browser. No need to download any software. It's all running in the cloud. All right. One of the things that people might laugh at is I got about halfway through this development and I was thinking about this and I was like, where have I seen this before? I was like, I am making a character creator. That's literally what I'm doing. I made one at Disney, the funny thing is I had to solve a lot of similar design challenges. So you'll see here that basically we have Tissue Workshop on the left. It's got a 3D viewport that's got to update quickly against parameters on the right. They got slider bars. There's nested menus. Same thing on this game Mass Effect over here. This is showing how you adjust kind of like the brow height, the sort of where the eyebrows are, color of the hair, all this kind of stuff. Very similar thing, and it's got to update and load the new 3D assets on the right in real time as you're configuring it. One of the things that's interesting is it's addressing very similar combinatoric challenges, right? So like in this character creator, one of the things you got to solve is like, okay, well, say that you've got this big necklace that somebody can have, but you also have a necktie. Can they wear both of them at the same time? Are those meshes going to interpenetrate? Maybe you have to put it in the same menu so they can't pick both at the same time. Maybe you don't care. Maybe it's like Second Life where it's just kind of up to the players, right? So you got to think through some of the same things. So once I realized that that was basically what I was making, made the design a lot easier. I could take reference and I could apply some of that knowledge that I had developed in building these to building this tool. It also really enables that high accessibility, right? Like these games are built so that anyone can pick up and play them. Doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter if you've played a game before. And so riffing on some of those same user interface options in Tissue Workshop really helped to keep it accessible. All right, so this tool fundamentally is performing generative design. And this can go by a bunch of different definitions. But when I think about this, I think about that power being in the algorithm that's making this. So what you're doing is you're taking in just a few bits of information, really. And it's shocking how little information. This is a example JSON file on the left here. I'm looking behind the scenes a little bit, but if you take the website apart, I'm sure you can find these. But this is basically a file that's going into the algorithm. Just got a very few number of parameters, but this is the kind of thing that you get out here on the right. This incredibly complex structure with all of this important detail. You can configure all these things to make sure that the specific types of tissues that you're trying to grow, the specific types of cells that you're trying to grow are going to grow well on the scaffold that you're printing. One of the things that I actually find kind of fun about this is that and the biologists in the room can correct me if I got this analogy wrong, but I find it kind of fascinating that you start, when you go through embryogenesis, when you turn from a cell into a full organism, into a full body, you're starting with DNA that's like a few gigabytes. But once you have an actual person, that's like exabytes of data almost incompressible data to represent that person. And so there's sort of an amusing analogy here where you're getting that massive data expansion in this generative design process. And so, the times where we use this is anything that's sort of tedious or near impossible or actually impossible to do by hand. In games, oftentimes this is used to do things like populate all the buildings in a city. An artist can't sit there and design every building by hand, but what they can do is they can work with a technical artist to build an algorithm where you can basically say, I want to have a 12-story building. I want it to have 4 windows across the front of it. I want it to have a brick texture. And then it gives you that 3D mesh. And so we're performing a very similar thing, but we're handling all that tool chain in the cloud so you don't have to do it. One of the things that was really important while building Tissue Workshop was shortening that iteration time. The time between I change one of those parameters and I get a new mesh back that I can look at. One of the things that we did for that is we added a preview mode, so it gives you sort of a rough version of the model that doesn't have all of the really advanced sort of punch-through operations, the sort of maintaining of the flow channels. And the important thing about keeping that latency low is that it allows you to really explore those design spaces. You might have a good idea of what you want going into it, and maybe that's exactly what you want coming out of it, but once you can play with it a little bit, you can create surprises for yourself. You'd be like, oh, that's actually a really interesting idea. Maybe if we did it that way, it might work. And so you can actually find things that you didn't think of before you started using the tool. Um, there was a number of really interesting things, associated with, we have to do similar sort of processes in games where we submit things to the server and we get information back as fast as we can. So there was some similar sort of architectural decisions had to be made there. And basically, if you're doing any service where you have this, you really have to think about that architecture, that latency, that low latency architecture from the very beginning, or else you can get into some difficult places. So I'm glad we did that with this tool. And again, it is up there, and you are welcome to check it out. All right. To wrap up here, I just want to share a few creativity exercises with you that you can do if you find yourself stuck, if you're trying to figure out what important work is there to do next, if you're trying to figure out how to solve a problem. And you need to think outside the box. So the first one is list making. So this sounds relatively straightforward, and it is, but I tell you, this is great practice. This does make a great daily activity. If you want to be more creative at work or just in life, doing one of these every morning for 3 minutes is a great exercise. One of the things you can do is basically, so you pick, I want to take X number of minutes to list Y number of items. And I recommend starting with like 3 minutes and like 20 items. Sounds like a lot. You might feel a little bit of brain freeze at the beginning, but once you do this a couple times, you can just start listing things. And the whole point of this is you really want to go no filter with this. You don't want to be holding back these ideas. You want to get them out as fast as you can, and we'll cull them back later. Numbering also helps with this stuff. It seems to unlock some extra sort of ways that your brain can think about it. You can identify certain items. Recommend trying that. The next one is sort of expansion and contraction cycles. And so the way that this works is oftentimes you'll do it with like a mind map, right? And again, hashtag no filter. Like when you're brainstorming, try to clear any sort of fears or like filtering out of your mind. So what you're going to do is you're going to throw up all the ideas that you can. You're going to link things together. Then once you're done with that, you basically highlight the ones that stand out to you, the interesting ideas, and sort of cross off the ones that aren't, so that when you go ahead and erase it, you can add those highlighted ideas back and do it again. And with this, you can really iterate and do deep dives on ideas and sort of directions that you can go very, very fast with these iteration loops. And, this is a business conference, so I can't get away without offering at least one tip to make your meetings better. So this is basically parallel brainstorming. One of the things that frustrates me is if you got a meeting with more than 3 people and one person is talking at a time and we're going around waiting for each person's idea, they might be great ideas, but you're still sitting there half the time and you feel like the majority of people aren't getting a chance to speak. Especially if they might be a little bit more shy or otherwise not speaking up or being called on or they don't want to interrupt. So what I like to do is hold these parallel brainstorms. So the way that this works is in a meeting with lots of people, everybody is going to take 3 minutes to brainstorm on their own. So what you do is everybody gets post-it notes or a text editor. They spend 3 minutes to brainstorm privately. Maybe it's list making, it's usually what it is, or it can be mind mapping. Once you're done with that, you combine everybody's items together. If it's post-it notes, you stick them up on the wall. If it's everybody's in a text terminal and we're doing this remotely, you're going to paste that into the same Google document. Then, while you're collecting all those, you can have 1 or 2 people organize them, deduplicate those items, and then you can talk through them together as a group. This is a really, really rapid way of collecting useful ideas and directions for your project or company. It's also important that you can keep this anonymous. One of the things that I'll oftentimes ask is, does anybody want to speak to this? Lets people stay anonymous if they'd like. This is useful if you're doing retrospectives, for example, on sort of how processes are working at your company. But you can do this for any sorts of things where you need new ideas. All right, well, thank you very much. Hopefully this taught you just a little bit about how we can take some lessons from the games industry, bring it into bioprinting. You can reach out to me at gavin@willhite.io. And thank you very much. Have a great conference.